Welcome to another video about my wonderful, glorious Maserati. So it's been just over a year since I bought this car, and you'll see from my other videos that I've done a lot of work on the car during the last year. So I thought it might be a good time to look at the costs that I've incurred, what it's actually been like to own the car, and of course what it's like to work on the car. Now, if you've watched any other Maserati videos on YouTube and made the unfortunate mistake of reading the comment sections, you'll get the general perception that by now I should have torn out all my hair, I should be completely bankrupt, and I should be regretting every decision I ever made that led me to this utterly ridiculous situation where I own one of these cars. So I thought I'd have a little bit of a look at the reasons why people feel like that about the Maserati, and just consider if they're right or wrong. Slight spoiler alert, I still have all my hair. Right, I've pulled over because I'm more Gerald Ford than JM, and I don't seem to be able to talk and drive at the same time. So what have I done in the last year? Well, it's been quite a long list and quite a lot of work to get her to the place I wanted her to be. A lot of this work was general maintenance that had just been perhaps deferred, perhaps previous owners hadn't done it. A lot of it was preventative maintenance, but most of it wasn't really required. I just wanted to get the car back up to a decent level, a decent standard, if you will. So I started off trying to get the car through the MOT. So to do that, I had to replace the rear tie rods. They've got some weird name in Italian. I'll put that up on the screen.
Also fixed the parking brake for free. It's just that little bit there circled in red, bit of WD-40 and all good.
I also replaced the front repeater indicator, which was actually quite a nice introduction to Maserati parts prices, if not particularly realistic of the general cost of parts on these cars. A whole new indicator with bulb was £10, and it came in a very, very fancy, shiny little Maserati box. Then after that, I basically had her through the MOT, and I just fitted wheel spacers. Now, that was a bit of a quick little job to do, and it felt quite nice because unfortunately Granturismos, the wheels are a little bit far into the wheel arches, so you fit wheel spacers and it just brings them out and just gives it that bit more nicer look to her, a bit better stance and everything like that. But then I had to start really getting the service items done. So I changed the engine oil, I changed the differential oil. I also then fitted an oil accumulator. Now this car unfortunately comes from the particular age group where it has a variator issue, because the variators were quite new at the time and they weren't quite designed as they are nowadays. I will get round to changing the variators soon, but the good thing about the oil accumulator is it dumps a load of oil in when you start the engine. It pre-pressurizes those variators and means that you don't get the noise and you don't really get any further variator wear or issues. With all those items done, I then decided to do a full oil change and change the mechatronic seals on the gearbox. Now, Maserati and ZF originally said that these things were sealed for life. They're not sealed for life, or rather you could say they are sealed for life, because if you don't change the oil, then their lifetime will be quite short. But yeah, so I changed all the oil in it, and that was a really good thing to do. By the way, you should really change the gearbox oil, and they do say now you should change the gearbox oil every 60,000 miles. Then I decided to change the engine mounts and the gearbox mount. Now, the reason for that was because the engine mounts were quite worn. They weren't so bad that you needed to change them, but they would have needed changing in 2 years, 3 years time. And the gearbox mount, I just thought I'd do it at the same time as well. The gearbox mount actually wasn't that bad at all and probably would have lasted a fair few years. Now, all of that involved me putting her up high on the ramps. So while she was on the ramps, I also did a coolant change. And then I looked at the parking sensors, which is a really good thing to do because you can't quite see where the end of the bonnet is. And for that reason, Granturismos tend to get scuffs on the front. So another thing I had to do at the same time was then fix the front bumper. which had come a cropper. It actually come a cropper with me as well, because I drove into McDonald's car park and got it caught on the curbs. So you see, McDonald's are bad for you.
I also got a little bit silly and stuck a personalised number plate on, like this.
But a car like this really needs to have that really cool sound from the V8 engine. So then I went on to the exhausts, and I did the exhausts. I cut them open and I cut out the valve that's on the 4.2s stuck inside there. It's quite a restrictive valve as well, so it's a really good thing to get rid of. Another job at this point was changing the control arm bushes. They were an advisory on the MOT, so they weren't strictly necessary, and they probably would have been good for another 2 or 3 years, but I thought it would be a good time to just get rid of them and get them changed. And then I decided I'd lower the car. The standard springs on the Maserati are quite soft because it is a Grantura. Also, the back of the car is quite high, and you've got quite a large gap over the top of the rear wheel to the rear wheel arch. I mean, it is something silly like 5-6 centimeters. So by fitting lowering springs, you bring that gap down, and the lowered springs are a bit stiffer, so she's just a little bit better in the corners now. So you can see I've done an awful lot of work, and I'm not finished. I also fixed the headlights. I did the front wheel arches here, repaired some little rust patches that were in there. I looked at the front subframe and did a little bit of work on that. I then came to some of perhaps the nicer, simpler jobs, like fitting the aluminium race pedals, which just made it look a lot better. I changed all my brake lines to stainless steel, which meant I also flushed all the brake fluid. It means she's had a full brake flush now. And then finally I did the wind booster, and that's a really nice addition. The Granturismo is set up to be a Grantura, so the throttle response is very, very slow. She's quite a fast car, but she feels slow because you put your foot down on the pedal and not a lot seems to happen until you really push down. And because of the sort of the calibration of that throttle pedal, the calibration of the gear changes seems to be quite slow as well. You fit a throttle booster on there and it really speeds up that sort of input and makes the car feel significantly faster. So yeah, it's been a lot of work. That's quite a list to rattle off, and it's rather hard to remember it all. I keep on looking down here to try and remember what I've done. So what's it all cost?
Well, the original purchase price was $4,500 due to the Cat-S damage that you can see there, 1 week's of MOT left, and a number of issues that needed addressing. To return her to the road and fix the bits of damage that I needed for the MOT and stuff like that, and also remembering that the MOT is actually the authorization to put her back on the road, it was another £1,971. Maintenance costs come in at £431. Note though, these aren't annual costs, and this I won't need really to spend this again for at least another year or 2, or maybe even 3. Modification costs, which aren't necessary. None of this was really necessary other than the oil accumulator at £412, I think it is, but those came in at £1,933. Obviously these are just one-off costs and won't be required to be spent again. So adding everything up together, we get to a grand total of £9,859. That includes a year of running costs at £1,000. That road tax is really, really painful. But of course you could untax the car for 2 or 3 months or even 4 months over the winter period, where all the ice and all the horrible salt's on the road, so you don't particularly want to use the car too much anyway. Another crazy point of those running costs there, of course, is the 12 months of insurance, which actually went down by £30 this year, so I'm really surprised by that. So generally, she's been relatively cheap to put back on the road and get together, and next year I really don't expect the costs for a year's worth of motoring to be much above about that £1,500, including all of that road tax and stuff, because all the serious stuff is done.
So as you can see from my costs there, I've spent a fair amount of money this year. But you've got to remember that, of course, that was taking a car that needed a reasonable amount of investment to get it back to a very good standard, or of the standard I wanted it to be. I didn't just want to get it to a standard where it's okay and it will pass an MOT and it will carry on to the next MOT. I wanted to fix a few things and improve a few things. As for the reliability of the car over the last year, yes, all the doomsayers would say, how many times did you break down? Well, the answer to that is simple. Nil. None. Zero. Zilch. Never. Nout. The car has been absolutely reliable, 100%. It has been absolute pleasure. I get in it, I turn the key, and straight away she's there. Yes, this is a mid-2000s car, so you do need to remember that mid-2000s electronics have sensors that advise you of a potential issue and sometimes don't necessarily advise you correctly. If every time a light comes on, you're going to have a heart attack and start going, oh my God, I need to get it trailered to the dealer, then this is not the car for you. It really isn't. Or any car from the mid-2000s is not a car for you, because all cars of that age had, guess what, the same electronics. Why? Because Maserati never built its own electronics. It doesn't make its own wiring looms. It doesn't make its own control arms or its ECUs. They are all items that come from a supplier, such as Bosch or someone like that. And all cars in about the mid-2000s could be finicky. Peugeots, if you disconnect the battery without using the right sort of method, you'd suddenly find that, oh dear, my central locking doesn't work properly ever again, unless I reflash the body module control interface unit or whatever it was. And all the cars typically had slightly sort of fussy sensors on them. That's not to say the electronics on this car is bad, they're not, but just don't run immediately to the dealer. If you see a warning come up on your dashboard, 99% of the time, it's because you've got a discharged battery or a weak battery. These cars, as with most cars mid-2000s, like their batteries. They like to have a fully charged battery. Otherwise, when you go to start up, you will have the Christmas tree sort of arrangement on your dashboard saying everything underneath the sun is wrong, everything is suddenly broken in an instant. No, it hasn't. It's just low battery voltage. Charge the battery, or better still, change the battery for a good tough battery, and everything will be fine with the world once again.
So to reiterate, the first step of troubleshooting is your battery okay? The next thing that I've done is I've got myself a Autel AP200 OBD2 scanner. And I actually leave that plugged into the car all the time, and that means I can read all the codes straight from the ECUs. I tend to read each ECU on its own rather than a system-wide scan, because otherwise you get a load of errors. Now, once you've read the system, if there is some kind of error on it, it will give you a code. And the great thing is you can take that code, you can stick it into Google along with, for instance, Maserati Granturismo and some of your symptoms, and 99 times out of 100 you'll find someone else in the world has had the same problem as you, and hopefully they've written down that solution on a forum or something.
So what are these cars actually like to work on? Well, I have to say, I mean, from my experience, and I can only run on my previous experience, I mean, I've worked on Cadillac Coupe de Villes from 1963, I've worked on Ford Model Ts, Triumph Spitfires, and all kinds of weird cars, as well as normal cars like Peugeot 406s, Volvo V50s and stuff. I have to say that this is one of the easiest cars I've ever worked on. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. For one thing, it's easy to get information for this car. There's no Haynes manual, but there's two fantastic forums in sportsmaserati.com and maseratilife.com. There's also the fact that I can go on Scuderia or Eurospares, and they've got all the parts diagrams there from Maserati, and all those parts diagrams are like exploded diagrams. So you can see how things go together. You can see where the bolts go. You've got all the parts number and the prices all there. You've got the Ferrari equivalents if they're cheaper as well. So you've got all that really good resources online. Now, compare that to the Volvo V50. I can't find anything. I mean, I have to search for ages on Google to understand anything, to find any parts. A lot of the parts are discontinued, you know, and it's really quite a struggle to work sometimes on the Volvo. A lot of the main part suppliers don't actually supply the bits as well. The parts availability for these is actually really good. I mean, most of the parts are available. Most of the parts are available on eBay as well, or
beware of eBay, because people often charge far more for a part on eBay than they would a brand new part. A case in point there is my under tray. It cost me 90 quid in a nice big Maserati box, direct, brand new from Maserati via Eurospares. eBay, 300 quid. It was all scratched and broken tabs and everything. And if you try to talk to them and say, you want too much money, mate, they'll just tell you to get lost. So parts availability and understanding how things to go together on this car is really easy, and that makes the job easier. The other thing, of course, is it is a large car. So you take out the air filter assemblies there and you can see the whole front of the engine right laid bare for you, everything to be done on it. And that's, as you know, it gives you a lot of space around your general components. Now, of course, if you've never worked on cars before and you're contemplating buying one of these and you're contemplating on working on it on yourself, first off, get good tools. Second, I would never dissuade anyone from giving it a go, but please try the simple jobs first, the jobs that won't result in big bills or big crashes. So in other words, if you do your windscreen wipers, you're not going to kill anyone if you get it wrong. If you do some of the more sort of simple jobs on the inside or an air filter, you probably won't be able to do any serious damage to you or anyone else. And just work your way up. Good tools though, good quality tools. I use Halfords, and they got lifetime warranty socket sets, and they're actually really good socket sets. But good tools, and just start small, work your way up, try things. If it's, you know, when you start getting to bits that are a little bit more critical, find someone else who knows what they're talking about, a friend or something, who make sure they know what they're talking about, to come around and just give you that second opinion, that quick glance over just to see what you've done and check it. If you find that you keep on making mistakes and you've tried many times and you're still making mistakes and you think, no, this is not for me, the great thing is you will have learned more about cars in general, and you have learned more about your car. So then if you take it to a specialist, you can give them a proper list of what you want them to do. You can give them some sort of background information that will mean that they can get to the root of the problem quickly. You'll also then have that deeper connection with your car. Even if you're getting someone else to work on it, you'll have that deeper connection where you understand what's under the bonnet. You understand what's been done on it. You have that sort of feeling in your head of how things work and everything. And that will make the car owning experience so much more pleasurable, and also will give you a much deeper sense of security. And that's something we really need to think more about in this modern world, where we're churning out kids who really don't understand anything about cars, anything about mechanics. And they're fine until the day comes when something breaks down on them, and then their confidence is shot. So having that background knowledge that can get you out of those simple problems can really give you a really strong sense of confidence and security. So it should be fairly obvious that I'm actually quite happy with my decision. Owning this car has actually been quite a pleasurable experience. It's really been a lovely thing to work on and a lovely thing to drive down the road. So why is there so much negativity from people online? Why is the car vilified by a certain group so much? And I kind of think there's like three reasons for this. The first reason is that perhaps the older Maseratis did lack a certain amount of reliability. They weren't quite as reliable as they should have been. But this is a different car. This is the Granturismo. This isn't something from the 80s or the 60s or the 70s or even the early 2000s. This is a very, very different car. And I can tell you, I've been over this car and it is very well put together and very well designed. As with any car, there might be a couple of niggles and you might think, I wish they'd done that slightly different. But hey, you find that on Rolls Royces, you find that on Bentleys, you even find that on American pickups, believe it or not, people. So the second reason I kind of feel like, though, is a lot of the people commenting actually have never owned one of these cars. They are literally talking from a position of, I'm going to be kind, a lack of knowledge. If you like, they're suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, anyone can actually suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's not, I'm not trying to put anyone down, But if you talk about something that you don't have at least a reasonable amount of knowledge about, then you're liable to make yourself look a little bit stupid when you come up against reality, facts that is. And if you're not careful, you'll end up one day trying to say, I'm going to take over Greenland, or Canada, you now belong to me. But this is all kind of connected to the third reason, I think, which is there's a lot of politics involved nowadays in everything in life. And I say politics as in, people want to be for or against something. They either think it's fantastic or they think it's terrible. There's no middle ground. People won't accept the fact that some things are okay. Some things are just fine. No more story to be told here. Move along, type sort of thinking. And I think you can blame some of this sort of attitude on basically the Jeremy Clarkson form of motoring journalism. You rush in and you make vast pronouncements. Why did they do that? The design is just stupid. Oh, these silly paddles. Coming from a person who I like very much. I've enjoyed watching Top Gear with Jeremy Clarkson for years. But I wouldn't quite count him as the sort of person who has a full in-depth knowledge about motor cars in general. Sorry, I know that might upset a few people, me saying that. But if you think he's the font of all knowledge, you really need to start doing some source checking and fact checking on your statements. So the Maserati, to me, it seems to be now getting quite a bit of a bad rep, and the depreciation situation isn't helping. But of course, the depreciation situation is driven by what people think of the car. And if everyone has a negative view, then the depreciation is going to be large. And you could say, well, you seem very bitter about it. No, I'm not bitter about this at all, because I've managed to buy a car that is far higher than my station. I managed to get a car that I can really enjoy at a price that I can afford. And if there are some people who don't appreciate that and don't understand what the car is like, then, well, never mind. But my advice to people out there who might be thinking about buying one of these is that this car represents an astonishingly large amount of value. These cars are currently very cheap. All the sort of fancy cars have lost a lot of value recently. Aston Martins are down sort of 20 grand. Jags can be had for 12, 14,000, the F-types. If you can bear the thought of being attached to the Jaguar brand at the moment, given their last advert. In actual fact, ignore that advert, chuck that out your head. They're fantastic cars. They always were. And this is just a blip in their history. Might actually be a bit of a put-up job to get a little bit more publicity, I suspect. But these things have really dropped. So the 4.2, you could get one for as low as £8,000 sometimes. It might not be the best example, of course, and might need a lot of work. But even really good, well-sorted examples might be as low as sort of 13, 14,000. There's one not far from here for 14,000 from a dealership with a warranty.
My son and I actually went and test drove that car about a year ago when it was up at 15,500. Lovely car.
So these are really good value cars, and I would say that they're probably at the bottom of the market. I mean, at the end of the day, these things will always have an intrinsic value. Again, the comments out there that you get on these videos, it'll be worth a packet of crisps by the end of the year. Absolute rubbish. So yes, in conclusion, I can sit here and say that as a Maserati owner, I'm very happy with my purchase that I made a year ago. I really enjoyed owning the car, and I look forward to owning the car for many more years and having many more trouble-free, wonderful journeys in my cool Granturismo. Thanks very much for watching, and if this video's been interesting to you or useful or something, then please like and subscribe. If on the other hand I've really annoyed you and you're really offended by everything I said, then feel free to moan at me ad nauseum in the comments, and I will try to answer as best I can.